There is this idea that being the quiet, lonely, quirky girl somehow turns you into something soft, poetic, and even desirable. And that if someone lives in their own world, struggles socially, and feels invisible, then that explanation must be autism. Amélie falls directly into that idea. It presents a character who looks whimsical on the surface, but the structure beneath her behavior comes from something a lot heavier and deeper. Amélie is a young woman living in Paris, working in a small cafe, and moving through life almost entirely on her own. She grows up in an emotionally distant household with a father who struggles to connect and a childhood shaped more by routine than by attachments. What you see there aligns with emotional neglect and limited emotional attunement during development. And this is why, as an adult, she spends more time observing people rather than participating actively in their lives. She begins quietly intervening in people's lives. She returns small objects, she orchestrates small acts that change people's routines, and builds connections indirectly without revealing herself, like an invisible woman. At the same time, she develops an interest in Nino, but instead of approaching him directly or sending him a more direct sign, she constructs a series of clues and interactions that allow her to stay hidden while feeling close to him. But what she's coming off as is an awkward, emotionally underdeveloped stalker. And everything in the movie moves in this pattern. She is present, but she's never fully seen, and somehow this is romanticized. Amélie is often read as this eccentric person that people either romanticize or pathologize. And the same traits get interpreted in completely different ways. Some people see her as aspirational, someone who turned loneliness into something beautiful. And I can understand that. Others reduce her to a label and call her autistic because she is awkward, observant, and internally focused. That trait comes from surface level trait matching, and it totally ignores the underlying mechanisms driving her behavior, or even driving the behavior of anyone who presents these traits and is simply a unique individual, just like most people have different traits and are different from each other and unique in their own way, but just mask better in social environments, so we can never really see that. Her imagination is one of the most misunderstood elements of the entire story. The film presents her inner world visually as if it is happening in reality. When she imagines herself dissolving into water after an emotional disappointment, or when she visualizes exaggerated reactions from others, you are not seeing literal events. You are seeing how she processes these experiences internally. And as much as it would be nice to just romanticize it and attribute it to a creative mind, what it really reflects is maladaptive daydreaming and fantasy-based coping. When internal narratives replace direct engagement with reality. She processes situations through imagery because she has spent most of her life alone with her own thoughts, rather than building social understanding through interaction with other people. She has social learning deficits, and that's when behavior develops through internal simulation instead of reciprocal feedback. And the same pattern appears in the way that she relates to people. When she follows Nino, collecting fragments of his identity through discarded photo booth pictures, or when she repeatedly observes her neighbor Raymond through small details, she engages at a distance, and that's actually sad, not comedic or funny. That distance reduces the need for vulnerability and is ultimately just an anxious, avoidant attachment style because she craves that intimacy and she feels sadness and disappointment in a very real and obvious way, but she also pushes people away and avoids that closeness precisely because she doesn't want to get hurt. This direct exposure feels unsafe. And the thing is, her behavior often gets interpreted in these two extremes. Some viewers regard it as charming curiosity, others read it as intrusive. And both of these are focusing on the surface. The structure underneath is actually quite consistent. She was never taught to engage directly, so she builds controlled ways to interact that allow her to stay protected. She has essentially behavioral avoidance and indirect social participation, not because she doesn't know how to, but because she wants to avoid the hurt. And the involvement in people's lives follows that logic, especially in the storyline when she returns the childhood box and begins orchestrating emotional outcomes for others. That shows how she creates connection without being visible inside of that relationship dynamics, because it is one way. She participates in someone's life, and for her, she is participating in that person's life and she is connected to them, but there is no relationship there because they don't know her. There is no real connection. It's just lonely. Her invisibility sits at the center of it all. She is physically present, but psychologically absent. And at the same time, emotionally all there. And the interesting thing is how the film presents all of this through so many colors and humor and music that almost hinges on comedic and romantic, when in reality it's the portrayal of a girl that has so much trauma that she fears to approach anyone at all in real life, and she craves that so much internally. The visual style is softening what is actually being shown. Even the childhood is framed this way. Even the way that people deny directly emotional connection with her in childhood is presented in this very abstract and eccentric way. Her father ultimately is abusive with her. He is rigid and completely emotionally distant. And however, this is presented playfully. And the underlying dynamics of that, it reflects how much influence this had on her directly and how much of her insecurity and her deep fears are rooted in her childhood. And that developmental environment carries into her adulthood. Limited affection, structured routines, and emotional distance shape how she relates to people later on. And this is where the confusion with autism starts to appear. Because being observant, introspective, sensitive, or socially unsure does not map onto autism on its own. Amélie's behavior aligns more closely with trauma-adjacent adaptations, social anxiety features, and developmental social isolation. And the misinterpretation comes from matching the visible traits without analyzing the origin of them. There are also moments where other characters respond to her as if her behavior is unusual or exaggerated, because her quietness, attention to detail, and the way that she interacts indirectly is treated as something outside of the norm, as if someone being quiet and attentive to detail and even deeply empathetic is somehow not expected as a human being, is not part of being a human and having humanity within you. And the interesting thing here is that her empathy actually develops through the same pathways as her withdrawal. She understands loneliness because she has lived inside of it her whole life. Her attentiveness to small details like noticing someone's preferences and creating highly specific acts of kindness show that she actually understands human cues and human sensitivity that might not be a reflection of what she likes and her own personality, but rather that she is so observant of others that she can clearly understand them without even saying a word. She has hyper attunement, and this often develops in individuals who rely on observation rather than interaction to understand others. They are still understanding others, just in a different way than usual. And there is also a broader pattern in how characters like her get interpreted. When someone exists outside of the social norm, that difference becomes somehow symbolic. It gets idealized or reduced to a label. The middle ground, where behavior is understood as an adaptation to lived experience, gets ignored. And this reflects the labeling bias that I talk about very often on the channel, and this cognitive simplification where we're just pathologizing everything, because behaviors are complex and humans are complex. They are more than a label and a diagnosis. But ultimately, Amélie's eccentricity points to one central human need, which is the need to be seen and recognized directly, the need to be loved, the desire to be loved, and the desire to love as well. And she does show that. She does show that deep down she wants to be seen. And she also clearly shows that she wants to love others. And she does, by the way she's so attentive to the little details, by the way she tries to understand her neighbor that she doesn't really know, but she observes in such a gentle way that it reveals this tenderness and this willingness to love. Although it's not an openness to love, there is willingness there, there is the desire there to love. And not just romantically, but just loving in the deepest, most humane way. And if you watch the movie and you follow her behavior closely, the focus shifts from identifying traits to understanding function. And at that point, her character becomes more specific. And at that point, if we understand this nuance and if we understand the source of her eccentricity, we understand that this should not be romanticized, but rather empathized with. And someone who craves so much, but is so afraid and withdrawn, really makes you think about what kind of life can lead someone to end up building connections in this way. And what can happen if they stay inside of it. Happily, in the end of the film, she does have her sort of happy ending. But I think reducing her entire character arc to the romantic relationship resolution is really reducing her as a person, because she could never have just a happily ever after without facing a lot of internal things. So if there was a part 2 of Amélie, it would probably reveal that she will have problems with intimacy, will struggle with just living a daily life with someone else, sharing a space with someone else, and will have to confront that and heal, and that it is absolutely possible to heal. So this is also not a video to tell you do not romanticize Amélie. No, it's just be aware that being exactly like Amélie is not a goal. We can relate to her, that's okay, but it's not aspirational. It is just a relatable character that we hope can heal, as much as I hope that if you relate to her, you can heal. And hopefully when you think of Amélie, rather than thinking that loneliness and sadness makes someone eccentric, because it doesn't, that eccentricity and the imagination will always be there. It's her personality, of course. It's just the attachment-based thing and the fear of being close to others that hopefully would change in her development once she reaches full adulthood. And I hope that this video has provided a different perspective, maybe even a more amplified perspective. I would love to know your thoughts. A reminder that you do not have to agree with me. You can disagree. You can leave your thoughts in the comments. I always love to read the comments and discuss, as long as we all remain respectful. And I will see you on the next one. Bye!